A lot of people stole things because they were hungry. They had no other means to live. I know people say, oh, other people got out the East End and they made it. It's not like that for everybody. I mean, some people are more brainy than others. They have more chances. And in your life, you mean to go one way and you're pulled another. It's not the individual's fault all the time.
The Krays had got something about them that was almost indefinable. To say that they were personalities is wrong because they projected an aura of evil, of power. They would resort to violence at the slightest provocation to establish a reputation. And this they did very, very successfully, so that not only foreigners and people that intruded into the East End, but members of their own gang respected them because of that violence.
But if the Krays were so evil, why did the community in which they lived put up with them for so long? In London's poorer quarters, the line between right and wrong had long been blurred. Many of life's simple pleasures were outlawed by the state. Late-night drinking, card and dice games, and off-course betting.
I mean, I lived in a place called South Grove Buildings. It was a big old block of flats. There was at least 3 bookmakers in there used to take the bets. And they all got a living. And all of a sudden they might say to my dad, Barney, my dad's name, Barney, got nicked today. So at B's turn to get nicked, to take him to court. Illegal bookmaking, street bookmaking, might get found a fiver.
The East End contained many illegal drinking and gambling clubs, which were frequently targeted by the police.
People were in there playing cards, and then the police would raid it. They take them to the police station, have to appear in court next morning, get fined 10 shillings, 5, whatever it was in them days. And that's where the people thought, what are we doing wrong? All we're doing is playing cards. We're not doing anything wrong. And they're arresting us, and so they lost their respect for them.
Down the East End, the police were sort of natural enemies in some extent, and people didn't come running in with information unless it was to their benefit.
Because there was so little respect for the law itself, many East Enders were unwilling to call on the police to investigate even serious crimes.
They're a community of their own. They've lived hard, they've had a hard time, but it was their ethics and a code of honour that you didn't normally grasp.
But this code of honour exposed the community to exploitation by professional criminals who turned it to their own advantage. In the East End, the law that was enforced was often the law of the Kray twins, Ronnie and Reggie.
The twins ran that part of London like an iron rod. There was nothing that went on in that East End that they didn't know about. If there was a wrongdoing, get off the manor, because they would come down on you like a ton of bricks.
Well, you know, they keep saying about protection. They was running the protection racket. It wasn't actually like it sounds. They would go into a place and say, if you don't give me we'll look after you. If you don't pay this, you'll be in trouble and all that. The people actually used to go to them and want them to look after it and let it be known that they was looking after a place. They wasn't actually, I suppose it is a protection racket in a way, but it was worked on a different basis. People used to go to them and ask them to look after them.
lots of people that walking into pubs that were taking a lot of money in those days. Remember, we were talking about the early 60s, when live music and good entertainment was throughout the East End, throughout every part of London. And protection money was being asked for. And therefore, rather than pay 3, 4, 5, 10 bullies, it's better to go and ask Ronnie and Reggie Kray, could you just appear for 10 minutes or have 1 or 2 drinks in our pub on a Saturday night? Once it was known as a pub that the Krays used, then that publican didn't have any more trouble.
They only went into people that were breaking the law. You know, like if you had a publican who was having a after-timer, then they could go into him. Or if they had a club where they were doing illegal gambling, dice, spieling or something like that, they would go into them. They want their whack. But no way could they ever go into straight people. Because first, if they come into you, the first thing you do is pick the phone up, give it to the police. And that was it. So the only people they could intimidate were people that couldn't phone the police.
I was known as Reggie's man. Scotch Ian Barry was known as Ronnie's man. The twins themselves would never like go on an organised robbery or a blagging or anything like that. They considered that the work of jailbirds, in their own words. But as soon as they heard of somebody who had it off, their first concern was, did they know anyone on the team? If they do, then they would go in for their whack, because there was their share. If he says, I'm not going to give you any money, you don't jump all over him. You come back and you say he's not going to pay. Now, that would be a different mission. Go and get 3 or 4 guys and go and sit on his house or a pub or a club where he drinks and give him a talking to. Send him to the hospital for a couple of days and then talk to him again. That was everyday firm work.
To take the heat off their activities as criminal overlords, the Krays maintained an elaborate facade of public relations.
They were very conscious of the public image. They worked a lot on it. And so what they would do is hire or use one of their own clubs and let it be known that they were organising a charity night. They didn't put their hands in their pockets and say, oh, look at this, I'm shocked about the children's unit has got no scanner or whatever. I'm going to put this money in. No, they would get other people to give it to them. Then they would hand it over, the cameras and whatever, and take the glory from it.
News of these up-and-coming charitable sportsmen was by now hitting Fleet Street. But to some crime reporters, the story didn't quite add up. Norman Lucas of the Sunday Mirror sought to win the Krays' confidence in search of the truth. He found the twins at their club, the Double R.
There was a constant flow of villains in and out, and they would stand at the other end of the bar and there would be whispered conversations, and then Reggie would say, well, oh, wait a minute, and he'd detach himself and go along the other end of the bar and have whispered conversations with these various people. It was then that I began to get my first suspicions that the Krays weren't what they were pretending to be, very, very honest chaps who were working for charities.
Norman Lucas nursed his suspicions about the Krays, but many patrons of the Double R saw nothing in the twins' conduct to disturb them.
Ronnie and Reggie were always the customer side of the bar with the customers. They were just socialising the whole time. You were never aware of any business going on whatsoever. They were just in the company all the time.
As we always said, if you want to be treated like a lady, you'd be speaking to a villain. I've been invited to lots of Chelsea parties with Hooray Henrys. I've heard language that I would never, ever hear in the East End when I was out with Ronnie and Reggie Kray. God, there'd be one look from his eyes if anyone dared to swear in front of his mother or his aunt or myself or any other lady in his presence.
Say they used to come to the Astor. You could feel a certain atmosphere. The Kray twins had arrived. That was the atmosphere that people got. I don't think it was fear. It was just, I suppose if the Queen was to walk in, every time I said, look, there's the Queen there, a feeling would arise.
This royal progress might have continued unchecked but for Ronnie's recurring bouts of mental instability. In 1958, he was committed to a mental hospital after attacking a man with a bayonet. Reggie Kray invited Norman Lucas to accompany him on a visit.
Reggie went in to this mental hospital, and I thought Reggie came out, and we drove off in a bit of a hurry. I must say, I was being driven. I was in their car, and so I turned round to Reggie like an idiot and said, how was Ronnie? And he said, well, I'm bloody Ronnie. He said, Reggie's in there now. And I thought, Jesus, what have I got myself into? I said, but you mean you're now an escaper? And he said, well, I'm not really, am I? He said, they shouldn't have put me in there in the first place. I'm perfectly sane. Why should they do that? And I thought, well, now where the hell does this put me? I mean, I'm just a newspaper man.
The switch pulled off, Reggie walked free. But Ronnie was now a fugitive, and Lucas perhaps an accomplice. With Reggie at his elbow, Lucas called on contacts at the Home Office to negotiate a surrender deal for Ronnie with no penalties attached.
And I came off the phone and Reggie said, I wouldn't have bloody believed it if I hadn't been standing in the phone box. He said, what's he saying, this man in the Home Office? I said, well, you heard. I said, if Ronnie will give himself up now or tomorrow morning, he will go back there, but he won't necessarily stay there. And Reggie said, well, that's bloody marvellous. He said, how is it you know such high-powered people at the Home Office? All part of the job, Reggie, all part of the job.
The job Lucas was really doing was penetrating the Krays empire in order to expose them. It wasn't easy, but following Ronnie's release, the police were having even less success.
It was always difficult to try to mount an action against the Krays if you worked in the East End. I mean, the story always was that whenever there was a serious crime in the East End, it was down to the Krays.
On 2 occasions I was approached by individuals, one of whom had a small club, the other had a small business making perfume for these suitcase sellers in Oxford Street, both of whom were threatened by the Krays to pay their rent, as they called it, and if they didn't, they got beaten up. And in fact, the chappie with the paw perfume, he got his place burnt down. And the answer is yes, they got there by fear and the lack of evidence.
In July 1964, Scotland Yard set up a special squad to investigate the Krays rackets. But even after Nipper Read had taken the twins into custody, key witnesses mysteriously withdrew their evidence, including one woman who had begged him to free her from the Krays.
When we said that we were taking these people away, they were going to be arrested, she fell down on her knees and grasped my legs in her arms and said, thank God, you've saved my life. And I said, we'll come later and take a statement from you, thinking that the next day would suffice. But the next day, of course, as happened in those days, we'd arrested the Krays at 1 o'clock in the morning. They were charged, and they appeared at court the next day. On that day, when they appeared at Old Street Magistrates Court, this lady, now resplendent in furs and high-heeled shoes, was there, all very nicely dressed, and saying, Mr. Read, I'd like to stand bail for my good friends, the Kray twins.
And so Read's first bid to jail the Krays collapsed. With Ronnie and Reggie back on the streets, they seemed invincible. But crime reporter Norman Lucas had hit on a sensational story. Lord Boothby, a leading member of the House of Lords, had been caught up in a homosexual relationship with Ronnie Kray.
Ronnie didn't hide the fact that he was a homosexual. He liked young boys, young men. There were writers, there were the politicians, like the famous ones like Boothby, Dryburgh, and a few others. Supposing Ronnie might fancy a showbiz, so he used to put what they call a W out. It's a warrant. Anybody can get him back to the twins would get a payment of some sort of cash. We were all up the West End somewhere one night in this well-known Chinese place, and we saw this guy sitting on his own, and Ronnie spotted him and said, who's that? And somebody said, that's Cliff Richards, an up-and-coming star, you know. And, I'd like to meet him, you know. So straight away there's a W out for him. If anyone can get him in to a meet, that's all he's got to do. Oh, Cliff, I don't particularly like his singing and all that, but he don't seem a bad guy. I wouldn't hate to see him involved with that sort of person, you know.
I thought, well, this has gone far enough, and now I think I should write an expose news story. I knew that once I'd done that, I was finished as far as the Krays were concerned, but it was a story which, in my view, needed to be published, and everybody needed to be made aware of what they really were, so that no more titled people or prominent show business people should be caught up in their web.
The problem was the sexual revelation at the heart of the story. The newspaper was delighted with the scoop and wanted to run it. Lucas himself was not so sure.
I said, well, we can't. We can run the story about their association with a peer, but we must not use the word homosexual, because who are we going to call if Boothby sues? Who can we call to prove this? We'll be sued for libel.
But Lucas was overruled. The newspaper's lawyer, Philip Levy, worked out a formula to protect the Mirror from a libel action.
And Levy said, well, as long as you just say the Yard are probing a homosexual relationship between Ronald Kray and a peer, you will be safe. and but don't mention Lord Boothby's name.
The allegation was inserted into Lucas's story. The Mirror went ahead and published.
But then, of course, the walls came tumbling down on the Monday because Boothby did the most cunning thing in the world. He wrote a letter to the Times saying, everybody says this is me. And on that basis, he sued us and got £46,000 damages, which, as I learned just 48 hours later, after he got the money, he was forced to hand over to the Krays, who blackmailed him and said, well, if you don't, we will say this is a true story.
Now the Kray twins seemed untouchable, but the old demons of paranoia returned to haunt Ronnie. The slightest squeak of opposition was enough to trigger the most extreme of responses.
With Ronnie, it was different. It was a bit more weird, if you like, because other people's violence, if he heard about it, he would get them to sit down, give it to him detail by detail. He got something out of it, you know. He was definitely Freddy Krueger type person. I mean, Ronnie would smash somebody. He would literally smash them, you know, with whatever he had in his hand. Doesn't matter if it was a hammer, a bayonet, or an axe, or whatever. He would just slice somebody for the wrong word.
One man with no respect was George Cornell, who had publicly ridiculed Ronnie for his sexual preferences.
People said to him, George, you know, you want to be careful. You're going over the top. You keep him, well, he won't stand for this, here you go. You know what he is? He's a nutter. That's how people say. He won't stand for this. And he carried on and carried on. Ronnie even said to me, I don't know what he thinks he is, that Cornell, you better not go too far with me.
In 1966, Cornell drove into the heart of Kray territory to take a very public drink in the Blind Beggar pub with his South London friend, Albie Woods.
We walked in the pub, we walked to the end of the bar. George plunked himself right in the corner with his back to a partition, and by the side of George there were some curtains which led into the public bar.
And this was at 8:10 in the evening. There were a number of other people in the pub, 32 people altogether, in fact. And the barmaid was behind the bar and so on. It was the normal kind of evening in a pub of that kind, when suddenly the door burst open and Ronnie Kray walked in with another man.
I think someone has stopped a couple of feet before they've reached me and about a step backwards, like, you know, near enough behind me. I looked back at George. I noticed there was a gun pointing at George. I looked back at George quick. George was really snarling at him, sneering at him.
Ronnie drew from his pocket a Luger automatic gun and just pointed it at Cornell's head and shot him straight through the forehead.
Well, it was absolutely terrible. You can imagine being there and there's people firing guns like in your direction. All I got is a stool, you know, in front of me. And, you know, what for, I don't know. The stool wasn't going to do any good. You don't think of nothing. You know, all I was thinking of, any second, like, it's going to be me.
Within minutes, the bar was empty. People were gone. The people that were with Cornell had left.
George was moaning and sort of groaning, like, you know. Anyway, I stood up. There was nothing I could do. I knew the ambulance was on its way, and I didn't want to get involved, and I walked out the pub.
There was really no motive. It was just a question of Ronnie trying to assert himself as a gang leader, to show that he was like the Americans, that he'd got his button, as they say, that he'd killed his man. He wanted to show his gang that he was really the colonel, He wanted the public to know that he was a gang leader. And so it was with this in mind that he was able to walk into the Blind Beggars with 32 other people inside, with no attempt to disguise himself, confident because of his ability as a gang leader that he could walk in there and know that no one would give evidence against him.
Charlie Kray was unaware of the shooting. A few hours later, he was summoned to meet Ronnie.
I said, what's the matter? He said, oh, I've just shot Cornell. So I said, what are you? What, in a pub? You've gone in a pub and shot someone in a pub? Oh, I said, oh, do me a favour, Ron. You know what'll happen now. They'll have you by tomorrow. Don't worry about that.
Ronnie eluded the police, but it wasn't long before they caught up with Albie Woods.
They said, right, now we want you to name who killed George Cornell. I said, I don't know who killed George Cornell. I said, I never saw their face. I said, it happened so quickly. I said, and, you know, just that they were standing behind me. I said, the shot, you know, went right across my face into George.
And when we tried to get witnesses, people said they didn't see anything, they didn't hear anything. You know, it's as if the thing had never happened. The barmaid said she was downstairs, she was in the cellars trying to get some more drinks up and things of that kind. And so that there was this desperate situation where suddenly this dramatic event had taken place and nobody had seen anything.
But they kept trying and putting plenty of pressure on, and you know, but with all the pressure and all what I was offered, you know, no way could they win me, man. I'd sooner be inside for the rest of my life than, you know, grass people up.
When I think about the Cornell case and all the problems, that was really the beginning of the worst problems I was ever going to have. When I knew what happened, when they told me, I thought, I was just sick inside, you know, and I thought then that this is the beginning of the end.